So the Jacksonville Jaguars might just actually be good.
What?
It sounds crazy to say, but it's true. After years of disappointment with little to no hope, Jacksonville is finally starting to show signs of life again. It's a brand new era in Jacksonville, and new head coach Liam Cohen has his team off to a hot 4-1 start after a big win over the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday Night Football. The Jaguars just put the league on notice, but is this an early season fluke, or is Jacksonville right back there in the mix as a true contender? It's no secret that the Jacksonville Jaguars haven't exactly been the poster childs of success since their first season back in 1995. As a matter of fact, since 2000, the Jaguars have only made the playoffs 4 times, most recently coming in 2022. That was the first season under Doug Peterson, who took over after spending 5 seasons as the Eagles head coach, where he won the Super Bowl back in 2017. Peterson was seen as a good hire, and the move made sense. Trevor Lawrence was in desperate need of some major development and help after the disaster that was Urban Meyer in 2021, and it seemed that Peterson filled that role perfectly. The Jags were immediately better and finished with their best record since 2017 when they went on to make the AFC Championship game. It was still an up and down year though. They had a 5-game losing streak early on, but turned around to win 6 of 7 games down the stretch after their bye, landing them the 4 seed in the playoffs. That set up that crazy wildcard comeback game between the Chargers and Jaguars. The Chargers were up 27-0 in the second quarter, and Trevor Lawrence had thrown 4 interceptions in the first half. Yes, 4. It looked like it was all over, but somehow it wasn't. The Jaguars came all the way back to take down the Chargers 31-30. That game was nuts and felt like it was just the tip of the iceberg of what Jacksonville could be, but turns out that was pretty much it. Jacksonville did hold their own the next week against Kansas City as Lawrence played better, but they ended up losing by just 1 score, 27-20. Regardless, that season created some hope for the future. The Jags entered the 2023 season with some pretty massive expectations just for them to finish with the exact same 9-8 record as the year before, but this time around, they missed out on the playoffs. And from there, it was really just all downhill. The Jags regressed even more the next season, going just 4-13, and Doug Peterson was ultimately fired. It felt like the Jags' window of opportunity closed just as fast as it had opened. But Jacksonville was set on changing that and hired former Buccaneers offensive coordinator Liam Cohen to be the next head coach. Cohen is another quarterback guy, much like Peterson was, and comes over after a single season as Tampa's OC, where he helped Baker Mayfield to a career year. In comparison to some other head coach candidates, he was a bit inexperienced, but Jacksonville liked what they saw and handed him the keys. And it's safe to say that it seems to be working. The Jacksonville Jaguars have had a pretty interesting start to the 2025 season, to say the least. They started the season off with a cupcake win over the terrible Carolina Panthers 26-10, and it was a good but not great performance by Lawrence, 19 of 31 for 178 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Then in week 2, the Jaguars had to go on the road to face off against the Cincinnati Bengals, and it ended up being a pretty close game. Joe Burrow ended up getting injured in the matchup, so Jake Browning had to step in, and that game really was just a mess. There were 5 interceptions thrown between the two quarterbacks, with Lawrence throwing 2 and Browning throwing 3, yet Cincinnati somehow pulled it out in the end. The Jaguars took the lead on a 25-yard Cam Little field goal with 11:43 remaining, and it all came down to Jake Browning and the Bengals, who managed a 15-play, 92-yard drive capped off by a Browning rushing touchdown to win the game. And honestly, that's just such a terrible way to lose the game, especially to a team who lost their starting quarterback. It was concerning, and it felt like Jacksonville might just be right back to where they started, in the gutter. However, that just hasn't been the case. In week 3, the Texans came to town for the Jags' first divisional matchup on the year, and Houston, we now know, isn't exactly the same team they were a few seasons ago, but at the time, it felt like a big win. Jacksonville won 17-10 in what was also a pretty messy game. Lawrence completed just 50% of his passes for 222 yards and a single interception. Again, not great, but seems to be enough to win. And that's really been the story of his season. Then in week 4 came a tough matchup against the San Francisco 49ers. Jacksonville surprisingly controlled the entire game and led pretty much the whole way through. Brock Purdy struggled, throwing 2 picks, and the Jags put the nail in the coffin with an 87-yard Parker Washington punt return to seal the deal. It was honestly kind of a shock to see the 49ers 49ers fall to Jacksonville at the time, but it really started the conversation of if the Jags were actually good. And I think we got our answer in week 5. The Jacksonville Jaguars faced off against the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday Night Football at home, and simply put, they put the league on watch. The Kansas City Chiefs have admittedly struggled this season, but their losses were to good teams, and now Jacksonville finds himself on that list too. It was still a very good game though. The Jaguars pulled it out 31-28, and the way they won the game was kind of hilarious. The game was tied with 12 minutes and 20 seconds remaining in the fourth quarter, and after Cam Little hit a 52-yard field goal with 8 minutes and 8 seconds left to take the lead, the Chiefs took it right back on a 12-play, 86-yard drive, capped off by a Kareem Hunt 2-yard rushing touchdown to go up 28-24. That meant that Trevor Lawrence and the Jags offense had 1 minute and 45 seconds on the clock to go down and score a touchdown. And somehow, the Jags went 60 yards in 7 plays to punch it in. And that final play was cinema. Trevor Lawrence takes the snap, but trips over his lineman's foot and falls to the ground. He then tries to get back up as soon as possible, but falls down again, and then somehow he manages to get to his feet, and he runs it in for the touchdown. And honestly, I don't know if I need to give Trevor Lawrence his props, or if Kansas City needs to lay off their entire pass rush, because that was just insane. So the Jags ended up winning 31-28, and this is a game where you really got to give Trevor his props. He was the team's leading rusher with 54 yards and 2 touchdowns rushing, not to mention he also had 221 yards and a touchdown and a pick through the air. It was a gritty win, and it showed that this team really does have the resilience to compete with anybody in the league. The Jags really do look like a brand new team, and head coach Liam Cohen feels like the biggest deal there, but they did also bring in some key new additions. The biggest name on the year is likely going to be Travis Hunter. He was the 2nd overall pick at the 2025 NFL Draft, and while he hasn't exactly done anything too remarkable on the stat sheet yet, he did just have his best game receiving against Kansas City, so who knows just how much better he can get. He does play both sides of the ball, so it will be interesting to see how the Jags continue to navigate that balance for him. And outside of him, the wide receiver core is rounded out by Brian Thomas Jr. and De'Ami Brown. Thomas, by the way, has just been incredible so far in his very short career, and has truly been a blessing to Trevor Lawrence, it seems. And running back, Travis Etienne is the lead back, but they did also draft former Virginia Tech Hokie Bashal Tutin in the 4th round, and he's been pretty good too. It certainly helps that the Jags offensive line has ranked out well lately too, which is certainly a nice improvement to see. That is definitely going to help Trevor Lawrence and those backs out in the long run. Then on the defensive side of the ball, they definitely have more changes from last year than the offense. Eric Armstead comes in after an 8-year career with the 49ers, where he was drafted back in 2015. He takes the place of Tyler Lacey, who's now with the Lions. Then linebacker Dennis Gardeck comes in after his time in Arizona, but it's really the secondary that feels like it got the most work done. Corner Jordan Lewis is new after his time in Dallas, and then safety Eric Murray joins the fold too. And those are all just the new additions. Obviously, Jacksonville has some guys that are still around from last year, but honestly, what's pretty funny about the Jaguars is even though their units as a whole on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball aren't exactly ranked extremely high, they're showing up and showing out against teams that many expect to beat them. And that alone is impressive. No, I'm still not sold on Trevor Lawrence. He still feels remarkably average at times, although his game against Kansas City was a bit of a bright spot. It's just hard to watch him at times and think, wow, this is a generational prospect. I think that he still has some major things that he needs to clean up and get better at, but at the end of the day, they're winning games, and I guess that's all that really matters.